Boo by B.J. Griffith. Boo! Rita jumped from both the jab to her ribs and the shout in her right ear. Her coffee flew out of the mug, across the counter, and onto the floor. She didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or scream bloody murder. Everyone knew Rita was as jumpy as a jackrabbit, so deliberately scaring her was just plain mean. Oh, but Carl was so attractive with those big dimples of his, and after all, they had just recently returned from their honeymoon, so maybe his behavior was just a newlywed game. No harm intended by this big lug of a guy. At least Rita hoped that was so. Carl just stood there grinning, a strapping 6'2" hunk with thick wavy hair. Though she was 8 years his senior, Rita's friends swore she looked like a frisky young filly when she was standing by his side. Rita grabbed a sponge and started to clean up the mess. "Oh, what an old lady I am. Sorry, Carl," she said, and gave her new husband a big kiss. Carl swatted Rita's firm round butt and gave it a squeeze. "That's my girl. Now how about helping me finish up my packing?" Carl was going hunting for a few days. Rita didn't like the idea of being in the house alone with no neighbors nearby, but she didn't dare say a word. Carl was so good-looking, and she had been so desperate in this two-bit town that she wouldn't do anything to jeopardize their new relationship. And everything had happened so fast. They had met only 3 months before and had already been married for 3 weeks. Rita sighed. She had been through their whirlwind courtship in her mind a dozen times. Sure, he had a temper. Yeah, he had been married twice before. Fortunately, no kids. But hell, he was letting her keep her hairdressing salon. That showed he cared about equality, women's lib, and all that, didn't it? Of course, she'd agree to put all her money into a joint bank account, but that was only fair. And she never ever mentioned that she was actually making more money than he was helping an old friend at his family's auto parts store. Nor did she talk about the value of her old Victorian family home, which she had remodeled into her upscale hair salon. No, she was just grateful to have found this charming rolling stone, or rather that he had found her, no matter what his faults might be. Broke as he was, he sure took care of her in that certain way that new husbands were supposed to take care of their wives. She blushed just thinking about it. Anyway, grabbing a few of the new woolly shirts that she'd just bought for him during her lunch break — he was fun to shop for because he looked so good in just about anything — she headed for the bedroom where Carl was haphazardly shoving things into a beat-up old case of his. "I don't know why you want to leave tonight. It's only a 45-minute drive to the cabin," said Rita, that almost bit her tongue at her stupidity. Never, she had to keep reminding herself, should I question his actions, rubbing the shoulder still sore from the last time she questioned him. Carl threw her one of his looks that sent shivers down her spine, but the wrong kind of shivers. Through clenched teeth, as if talking to a 3-year-old, he said, "'Cause my buddies are waiting for me, and I want to be there when the sun comes up and those dumb deer are just standing there waiting for it. That's why." Rita quickly placed the shirts on the bed and turned away. Sometimes Carl made it hard for her to be thankful for having him. Maybe it would do them some good to be apart for a couple of days. By 8 o'clock, Carl had finished loading his old pickup truck, which looked to her like something from a demolition derby. He came into the kitchen, plopped down at the table, and popped open a beer. Rita struggled to make sure her face showed no signs of disapproval at the idea of Carl zipping around the mountain roads at night with a loaded rifle and a couple of beers under his belt. "You going to be okay on your own?" Carl asked, which both surprised and flattered Rita. "Oh, I'm going to be just fine. I'll catch up on some reading and turn in early tonight. I'm going to visit my mom tomorrow and will probably sleep over." Carl gave Rita a rough squeeze and a whiskery beer smooch at the door, and then rattled off in a huge plume of exhaust. Rita carefully locked the door, switched off the porch light, and then checked each room of the house as well as the deadbolt on the back door, tidying up as she went. All secure. She shrugged and shook her head. "What a jumpy old lady I am." Her nerves still a bit on edge, Rita took her time getting ready for bed. She prepared a mug of chamomile tea, loaded her favorite plate with lemon cookies, grabbed her chick-lit book and a heavy-duty flashlight, and carried them into the guest bedroom where she could snuggle down in the cozy, quilt-covered single bed. As an afterthought, she decided to add a defensive weapon to this setup. So Rita tiptoed into the den they shared as a combination TV room and home office, and went over to the shelf where Carl kept his vintage Bowie knife. She was surprised that it wasn't there, but shrugged it off. She could just take a butcher knife from the kitchen, or even the staple gun from the mudroom. She laughed and shook her head at that thought. Looking around the empty den, Rita had a sudden burst of mental energy and decided to catch up on some paperwork. She sat down at the desk and looked over at her to-do bin. What her eyes settled on instead was the small framed photo of her beloved beagle that had died the previous year. She picked up the photo and gently caressed the glass with her thumbs. Good old Mud Flaps, whom she lovingly called Mud for short. He had been a great hunting dog in his youth, but when he got a bit long in the tooth, his thoughtless owner left him at the shelter, where Rita sometimes helped with grooming. She fell in love with this nearsighted, hard-of-hearing old guy with his long, floppy ears, and was happy to share her home and her life with him. In fact, slumbering Mud became a regular feature at her hair salon. When Mud passed, she was sorely tempted to get another dog, but her girlfriends teased her, saying she was too young to settle for an old hound when she could get herself a man who would take out the trash and mow the lawn. Boy, were they wrong about that image. How she missed the loyalty, gentleness, and simplicity of her tail-wagging companion. Rita sighed, put down the photo, and slid the bin closer. On top of the pile, she found some papers that needed filing, paid bills, their new joint life insurance policy, and an owner's manual for their new microwave oven. After getting those filed away, she came across some unpaid bills and their last bank and credit card statements. She glanced at the bank balance and was pleased to see it was holding at a steady $1,000, right where she liked it to be. Next, she looked at the credit card statement and frowned. Ooh, that balance was higher than usual. She ran her eye down the list of charges and stopped at one for Edgeworks sharpening services for $25.99. Could that be where the Bowie knife was? She saw another charge for $49 for www.heavyhardcore.com. Ugh, Rita hoped that had something to do with the awful music Carl liked, but for $50? The last thing she noticed that made her sit up straight and stare was a cash withdrawal for $300 the week before. What the heck? What did Carl need money for that was so much higher than his typical $40 ATM withdrawals? Heart pounding, she started booting up the laptop. At that moment, her old cuckoo clock chimed 10 p.m., causing Rita to jump so hard she knocked her pen holder onto the floor. "Oh, good Lord, my nerves," she scolded as she picked everything back up. "Someday I'm going to give myself a heart attack." Rita logged into their joint bank account. Her jaw dropped and her heart went thud when she saw that Carl had made a cash withdrawal of $880 the day before, leaving just over $100 in the account. She quickly went into their credit card account, scrolled down to current transactions, and saw another cash withdrawal for $1,000 just that morning. Was he planning to run away from home or something? Her first thought was to call Carl, but she immediately realized she couldn't do that. His reaction would be ugly, so ugly he might even race home to confront her, if he wasn't already passed out with his hunting buddies, that is. She shook her head to clear it. She thought of calling her mother, but shook her head again, imagining the annoying "I told you so" tone her mother would take. Rita sat frozen, terrified by the image of her scheming husband and what he was doing to her previously simple life. She thought back to her first impression of him, so movie star good looking that she thought people in this podunk town would be asking for his autograph. Now she wondered whether they would be wanting his fingerprints instead. She pushed away that fleeting but grim thought. Rita felt so vulnerable that she crept into the kitchen to find that butcher knife, hoping that having it near her in bed might calm her down so she could get some sleep and figure it all out in the morning. Just as she was reaching into the drawer, Rita thought she heard a shuffling noise that seemed to be coming from somewhere near the back door. Tiptoeing to the doorway, she leaned her head out into the hallway and could see that the deadbolt was securely in place. But then she saw something on the floor that made her start. She jerked her head back. Was that a snake? She hated snakes. Her heart was racing, and she shifted the butcher knife to her right hand in a defensive stabbing position. She forced herself to inch toward the hallway and take another look. She shook her head and smiled at her overly active imagination. What she actually saw on the floor, just peeking out from under the closet door, was one of the thick red laces of Carl's heavy hunting boots. But that didn't make sense. He should have been wearing them. Baffled but determined to figure this out, she silently moved forward, and with the knife raised in her right hand, she quickly slid the closet door open with her left. For one shocking second, Rita and Carl stood face to face and locked eyes before he raised the Bowie knife to complete his murderous plan. But he hadn't counted on Rita's super jangled nerves. She instantly lunged, plunging the butcher knife into his chest before he could even say boo. The district attorney did not press charges, ruling this clearly a case of self-defense. What's more, DNA testing later connected Carl to 2 unsolved murders in a nearby state, thereby discrediting the alibi that had been provided by his hunting buddies. After a time, Rita was able to celebrate her regained freedom with her new beau, Bo, a delightfully uncomplicated old setter she adopted to keep her company. Thank you very much.